Okay, Alexandra, thank you so much for joining me today. Welcome to Racking Up Rentals.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here. So thanks for inviting me.
Well, I'm really excited too, and I got to tell you, before I even knew you, and we're still kind of getting to know each other, but when I was only like aware of who you are, I immediately knew like this is somebody who I can learn a lot from, and somebody who I can be challenged by, and so I'm just grateful to get the chance to spend some more time with you and have you tell the good people here who listen to this show about your story, which I think is awesome. And I want to just tell you first, I have like a theme. I've never
Okay.
I've never like imposed a theme in an interview before, but I think it's going to be a natural theme. I think you'll be down with this. And the theme is in the words that you and I hear all the time of our mutual friend and mentor Greg Pinio. Growth is the grail, and sameness is the enemy. And when I think of what I know about your story, and when I think of what I know people will love to hear about your story, I think to me it's a story of growth and like lots of different dimensions of what growth is. But does that theme sound fair enough to you?
That sounds great to me. Yes. When you're saying there's a theme, I was like, oh, I hope I actually can get on board with this theme. But this is a great theme. So I'm
Yeah.
excited. And just so you know, before I knew who you were, I felt the same way about you. So I'm excited to be here and also learning
Uh,
from
well, thank you. Thank you so
you.
much. Yeah,
Yeah.
I really appreciate that. So growth is the grail, sameness is the enemy. I think it's so easy to assume growth just means like growing in size, and you do a deal this big and the next one's twice as big and the next one's twice as big, and that's one aspect of it. But I think a lot about like the growth though as a person, and I'm
Yeah.
excited to sort of unpack both of those with you, because from what I know about your story, like both of those things have been very true. Like a lot of growth in the sort of literal, like obvious sense of numbers and deal sizes and property sizes and square feet and all that. But then this other journey too of kind of like growing personally and continuing to find like your own niche in the real estate world overall. So that's kind of what I'm going to try to lead us to unpack a little bit about that. But why don't like let's start at an obvious spot if you don't mind. Who is this Alexandra Hayter person? Who are you?
Yeah, so a little bit of backstory about me. I was born and raised in technically an unincorporated village outside of Eau Claire, Wisconsin, but basically grew up in the country, right outside of decent sized city in Wisconsin. My parents owned a business, but they also had student rentals. And so I grew up essentially helping them to do the turnover. When student tenants would move out, there was a period of basically a week that we would go in, and my parents were completely hands-on with this. They didn't hire anybody, so we would go and we would turn over these units, and it was like essentially a week of very, very long days that were like not the most fun for us as kids, because we were always on like cleaning duty, and it was just annoying. At that age, in hindsight, very glad that we were brought into that because I could see it. And I wasn't kept in the dark with what my parents were doing. And so anyways, grew up with parents who were entrepreneurs. They also owned another business, asbestos abatement. And then I was kind of thinking that I wanted to be maybe a teacher. I wasn't 100% sure. Originally, so I finished high school, went to the University of Minnesota for college. Originally thought, I don't know what I want to be, so I'll be a veterinarian. Went a couple of years in animal sciences, and then my dad was like, you don't want to spend all day with your hand up a cow's butt. So I was like, well, no, that's not really what I want. And he was convinced that would be what would happen. And so I was kind of like trying to figure out what I wanted to do. Ended up deciding to be a teacher, wasn't sure what I wanted to teach. Thought I would maybe do psychology or something like that. And then again, dad was like, no, you want to do one of the core subjects, like you always have a job. I was like, oh, smart point, dad. So I decided to become an English teacher. Actually went through and got my master's degree in education of English literature and communication arts. But anyways, I was a teacher for about 3 years. After year 2, I was like, this is just really not what I want to do for the rest of my life. And I was in a more urban, higher poverty, probably, you know, lower achieving district my first 2 years. And it was very difficult, mentally draining, and it was really hard. And so then my third year, I switched to a more affluent and what would be considered an easier, quote unquote, district. And it was in a lot of ways, but it still wasn't what I wanted to do forever. And, you know, as a teacher, I was also, for the majority of that time, I was still in school. I actually got even more than my master's degree, no title or anything, just additional courses, because I'm trying to work my way up the pay schedule, right? And I was also coaching, and in the summers I worked at a restaurant, and so I was working a lot, and I was doing that because I really wanted to travel, and I didn't want to always be so tight on money. And so in the back of my mind, I always knew that, you know, look at what my parents did. They bought investment properties. And so as a W-2 employee, I was thinking the best thing to do would be to get anywhere from a 2 to 4 unit, get a traditional Fannie Mae or Freddie loan, you know, and house hack, live in one unit, have the other unit or units, pay for my rent. And so that was the plan. And so I started offering on properties, and offered on a lot of properties, and became good friends with my realtor. He was really cool, and he basically convinced me, because during this time, you know, we're working together for a long time. We probably put in maybe 20 offers. We put in a lot of offers, and I just never got an offer accepted. I was able to put minimum down. I wanted an inspection. I was offering on really low price point houses that a lot of people are trying to get. You know, it wasn't like a groundbreaking, unique idea that I had that no one else had. Like, this is what beginning investors want to do, and this is what I wanted to do. So anyways, Judd and I became friends, and after, you know, a couple of months, he actually one evening was like, you know, you really should look into doing real estate. He's like, I think you would love it. I think you'd be good at it. I'd love to have you on my team. And he was looking to grow a team. So it was actually, I decided to do it. It was actually just him and I. And so anyways, I agreed to it, but the plan was that I was still going to teach, and then I was going to do real estate after I was done teaching. You know, in evenings and on weekends, I was like, well, this is perfect. And maybe I won't coach anymore. But I'll still be able to do both of these things. Well, I started doing real estate in the summer, and at that time I was just doing summer school, and summer school is like 4 hours a day and 4 days a week. And even with just that, I was starting to build business and starting to get listings, and obviously still looking for investment properties for myself. And just in that short period of time, I was like, there's just no way that I can do both of these and do either of them well. And I like this so much more. And so I decided I was going to be done teaching, and devoted myself full time to real estate. I know a lot of people have considered doing something similar. For me, I feel kind of blessed because as a teacher, you know, I got those paychecks through the summer still. You're technically supposed to have your summers off, right? Not many people take those off. But so my last paycheck came, and then 2 weeks later was my first commission. And so I never had that leg, thank God, because I didn't really have much of a savings. And I feel very fortunate to have been in that position. But anyways, so I started doing real estate full time. I was introduced to my first investment property by my brother. So my brother was already an investor. He dropped out of college, which I thought was like the worst thing in the world. Really cool brother. His name's Jake Brackenwagen. But anyways, he found this little house in the middle of nowhere, and he was like, you know, this is too small for me, but would you want to do it? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. He's like, okay, well, whatever you sell it, give me 20% of the profit and take it. So I bought this little house in the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin, for $16,000, which I had to borrow half of that. And literally it was like the middle of nowhere. So no cell phone reception there, no internet. It was also unincorporated. There was one person who lived across the street and definitely was on drugs. He'd be like running around in the rain, swinging on swings and playing basketball by himself, and like was an adult. And it was just like, it was odd. And so I was there and I was trying to figure out how to do house renovations, and people would come and visit me. So, or like help me, you know, my boyfriend at the time, now my husband, would come and help, but he had a job too. And so like a lot of time it was just myself, and my sister came once, my parents came, my brother came, taught me how to drywall. That was like horrible. I did the worst drywall ever. It's very heavy, like so heavy. And yeah, like I made a ton of mistakes there and made a lot of things look really ugly and had to redo them, and cried a lot and bled a lot and like learned a lot, and ended up finishing this house, and I sold it for 70,000 on a contract for deed. So I got all my money back, and then I'm actually still to this day getting monthly payments, and then within like now at this point like another year he has to refinance me out. So that was my first deal. And from
So,
that, I learned a ton. Yep, go ahead.
so I'm just like trying to like pin this in time for like a point of reference for people. What year was that when you did this first single family deal?
I bought it November of 2018.
Okay, right. So for people listening now or in the future, we're recording this in August of 2023. So this is less than 5 years ago.
Yes.
Right? So less than 5 years ago. And so like, let's put a pin in that for a second, and let's talk about kind of what you're doing right now. And then I think it'd be great to talk about what has happened in between that has allowed you the growth that you've had, growth in terms of financial stuff like we talked about, but also the growth on the personal side. So like if we were to just take a snapshot of what your real estate investment life looks like today, what does that look like then?
So my favorite asset class now is strip malls. I like retail strip malls. I own 3 of them and I'm actively looking to acquire more. I still have about 250 doors of apartments, and a little shy of 400,000 square feet of real estate. So a lot different than it was back then.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, it's been really fun. And yeah.
Yeah. So okay. Hopefully everybody listening is like, wow, the bookends of what we just established, right? $16,000 single family home to $400,000 or 400,000 feet of commercial space and 250 apartments, all of that. There's a big gap between those, and only 5 years that happened between them. So I hope that everybody listening will not just be like, oh wow, look how much more money she's making now, although that's absolutely true too. I'd like to understand. So when I saw you present recently and kind of go like deal by deal through this,
Yep.
my takeaway was like there was a very quick evolution of deal type, right? Like it wasn't like let me do 10 single family ones and then okay, I'll do 10 duplexes and then I'll do 10 fourplexes. It was like each one was kind of like different than the one previously. What do you think sort of enabled you to either have the skills or the confidence or the inspiration to kind of do something different each time?
So, okay, so initially when I was doing residential, because I did start out with, a few single families and then smaller multifamilies to bigger multifamily. That to me was familiar, and I was like, I understand this, right? I grew up, my parents did this. This is just people. I've been a tenant my whole life. I understand the basics of it. So that was to me pretty simple. I also, my husband got his contractor's license in the beginning. He was helping me a lot. And I feel like I have, and I think a lot of people have at least somebody who's pretty handy that they know. So that was pretty easy to start off with, but then, I bought my first, maybe not even a year after that first deal I talked about, I bought my first commercial property, and my first commercial property had 4 apartments above 3 commercial units. And I was like, okay, well, I hate the commercial units. I don't understand them. I don't know what I'm doing. They're all vacant, right? Oh no, there was a thrift store in one of them. But I was like, even if I can't figure out these commercial, at least I know what I'm doing with the apartments above. And so, um, you know, the crazy thing was once I got started on it, I was like, I love these commercial tenants because they're businesses. And the commercial tenants, I really enjoy meeting with people who have these goals for themselves and they're really ambitious and they're like, this was a smaller property kind of it was in northern Minnesota, so not like a big, it was in Hinckley, so kind of a smaller town. But these people, it was their first business, or one of their first businesses. They're not like really established, but they're very excited about this and they're excited about the opportunity. And for me, I was really excited that they were excited.
Yeah.
So once I started seeing in my mixed use where I was like having apartments, and I did a bunch of these, and then commercial below, once I started seeing, these commercial tenants and how that worked, I loved it. And so, it made it pretty easy for me I think mixed use is kind of good for people because they know what they're doing typically with residential. I feel like this is the traditional, if they switch to commercial, I feel like this is very common the way that I'm doing it. But yeah, I think it was really nice for me to have these mixed use and see how much I like the commercial units.
Yeah.
And then of course, then I bought my first commercial property that was in Waseca in a portfolio of mixed use. And there was one that was commercial only. And I loved that. And then I started buying and then I bought my first strip mall, which was 77,000 square feet. So
yeah. Oh my gosh. So the first commercial property it was not like you sat down and said, I think I'm gonna just consciously make the decision to move into commercial.
No.
It was a little by happenstance, right? But you did expose yourself to new things that you hadn't done before and said, well, I guess I'm gonna have to learn and figure this out. But then it turns out the new thing was the thing that you liked better, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And one thing too, in hindsight, I'm buying properties with commercial units I was buying in these smaller cities, right? That's actually a lot more difficult to rent out than commercial on a busy street in a busy city. So, really, if you can rent those out, it should be a lot easier for you to find tenants for bigger, more expensive and higher density and, like in more, I guess, like sought after areas. So because I was able to do that when I got into better areas and locations, it was actually like more simple for me. And that was pretty fun.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just thinking about how I can relate to where you were in that point. Like, actually, I'm recording this right now. I'm in our one commercial building.
Okay.
Most of what we do is residential.
Yep.
This is one commercial building. I bought it not because it was a commercial building exactly, but because it's a gorgeous building in a great location, which is sort of the same standard I would use for our residential stuff too.
Yeah.
But I feel like you just described, which is sort of like, I'm not exactly sure. I'm not exactly sure like perfectly how to run it. I sort of run it not too differently than I run my residential properties, but even like recently, so this is like street level retail and then some offices above, small building overall, about 8 total tenants. And one of my retail ones was gonna leave a few months ago, and at that moment I was like, I felt concerned because I didn't, in my sleep now, I can turn over a residential unit, which we've got it down obviously because you just do it a lot. But in this case, I was like worried. I don't really know exactly how to do this. I mean, and these are small units, and they are mom and pop businesses. So I'm kind of treating them in this sort of mom and pop way. So we're posting like ads on Craigslist and things like this. But this property doesn't feel to me so much like, oh, you hire a commercial leasing agent, you pay a whole lot, and you have this huge commission, and you have this huge TI budget. This feels small, but all of that feels so unfamiliar that it's embarrassing to say, but it kind of scares me, or it makes me just feel like unconfident, right? Like energetically, I'm just like pushing it away going, oh no. So I totally know like what you felt like, but what I love is that you blasted right through that though, and you're like, oh no, actually I like figuring this new thing out. And I look at myself and I'm like, gosh, this is almost holding me back from that type of growth, because like there's that new thing to get familiar with, and I'm not there yet.
So did you rent out that unit?
I did, but we actually rented it to an adjacent tenant who wanted to expand.
So that's perfect. And that happens a lot, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, it's it's so fun for me meeting with the mom and pops, because they're my favorites. You know, I've had them cry and be so excited that we're giving them a chance, and this is their goal and their dream for their life. And usually a lot of times you're getting them started, and then if you get to see them expand, it's amazing. And it's very rewarding. So yeah, I really enjoy it.
Yeah. So the properties that you're buying now,
Mhm.
are they still like, these are beyond mom and pop tenants, so right? These are more like regional or national type tenants, or is
So
it
I
kind of
have
a mix?
It's a mix. So
Okay.
I still definitely rent to some, you know, mom and pop type tenants, and I love that. But I also have some national tenants. So I'm not buying class A retail. Definitely probably more a class B, class C, but I do have criteria for what I'm looking for. Um and I really like filling those units. And a lot of times we'll start them with shorter leases, and then once they're successful, we'll extend the leases to longer leases. So it is, maybe this is still part of my transition, right? Where maybe 5 years from now, it'll be more longer leases, national tenants exclusively. Who knows? I really am enjoying this part of it though.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's very cool. And did you decide, so when you hit this thing that where you're like, okay, I need to learn how to lease up these units and manage them and just learn how the dynamics and the contracts and all that are very different than residential. Did you decide to learn all of that yourself and sort of act as your own leasing agent? And are you still doing that now? Or did you say, nope, you know what, everything is outsourceable. I can just build a team, and now we have leasing agents for our space. Like if you're gonna, completely re-tenant a strip mall that you buy and that you love and you see all this potential in, are you mostly leasing it up yourself, or do you have a team that's doing that now?
So both. So in one of our centers, we have a leasing broker. In my first one I did it with my brother and then my other partner. And the three of us, one of them he was more the mentor of this, and so he was not very hands-on. My brother and I were hands-on. We were each the third owners of it. I think when we stabilized it, I think every tenant was actually I did the lease, except for there was one tenant who knew Rafiq, who's my mentor. He had been in other strip malls with that Rafiq owned. So the rest of them, I did the leasing myself, and it wasn't that difficult. To be honest, the majority of the leads, I was worried about this, right? Like, how do I advertise this? What do I do? I'm throwing it on Crexy, Facebook, Craigslist, everything you're saying. We did put on CoStar. The majority of my leads actually came from the billboard. The big sign in front, people see it, and we put big signs in the window for lease, call, text, my number. And it was as simple as answering my phone and meeting with them. Now that was about an hour and a half away from me. So the first couple I did drive out there, and then towards the end, I started having actually my sister who lives in Eau Claire, she would just open the door for them. And then I would do the negotiating and stuff. At least the first time she would be there to open the door, so I'm not driving all the way to Eau Claire. That is my closest strip mall out of all of them. So, that's what we've kind of been doing, is having someone there to just open the door, and then I'm doing the negotiating. I'm talking to them on the phone. I'm explaining what we can do. They're the boots on the ground opening the door, but I do not want them leasing it. I want to be leasing it. We did hire a company. So the next one we purchased was in Illinois. And that one I purchased again with my mentor, and we're 50-50 owners of it. We tried having a leasing company lease out the vacancies there. In 1 year, they did not fill any new vacancies. And I was like, what is going on? Like, are we overpriced? was this just a horrible area and we didn't know, like, what's happening? So I let them go, and within 3 months I had signed 3 leases myself. So I don't know what it is, but I'm hesitant to let somebody else try to do that. Now, my most recent acquisition is another strip mall in Ohio, and that leasing agent is doing a great job, and she's there a lot, and she's helping us with even additional things. Like, we had a new roof put on and there was an issue where it was leaking, and the things that happen. But it's in Ohio, so that's an 11-hour drive for me, or a flight. Not easy to get to. So she's been really helpful there, and I'm letting her do the leasing there, and she's been doing a good job. So I think it really is, it's hard to know who you can trust and who's actually going to do a good job with the leasing and care. But I think on that second one, I let it go too long. We had signed this contract and it was for a year, and I should have probably terminated that sooner, but you don't know what you don't know. And I hadn't done this before, and I kept thinking, they're like, well, this is common, this is not abnormal, like. And then I was thinking there's something wrong with the location. Well, I took it back, and now I'm signing another lease today. So it's just, I don't know. It was a learning experience, like everything.
Yeah. So here's a question that's not necessarily part of unpacking your story, but just like something I need to learn personally. Is, again, my main reference point, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners too, is residential, right? So if you get a feel for your market, what people want to rent, what rents should be. If something is not rented, you can see it's usually not hard to see why, what you'd have to do to get it to a spot that fits what the market wants.
Yep.
When I take all those thoughts and put them in commercial, I feel less sure of myself, I guess. So I came home from Power Players recently after seeing your presentation. I'm like, okay, I'm going to go into my community of small towns and look for like basically strip malls and things like that don't look like they're being managed very well, or with some vacant units, and try to do my thing in that context. But I feel this sort of like lack of confidence myself in knowing for sure what makes for a good strip mall. Like, there's part of the back of my head is like, if that unit is vacant now and this was a great building, wouldn't it be filling up even if the place wasn't managed very well? So I guess what I'm saying is, like, trying to get to a level of confidence, like in my residential stuff, I know exactly what we'll rent. There's very few surprises to me with that, because I feel like I know the market. But shifting to commercial, especially like small retail and stuff like that, feels scarier and more speculative, because I don't know like what the total layups are necessarily. How does one cover the gap? I don't know. I'm not sure if my question is clear, but
no, I get what you're saying, definitely, because that was 100% the reason why with my first commercial building, I was like, well, crap, it has these commercial units. I like it enough to keep it, even though it has those. For one thing, seeing vacancies in a good building does not mean that there's something wrong with the building, right? So if you have heavy traffic counts there, and there's maybe like some tenants around the area, it's in a good commercial area, and maybe you have some like, I don't know, like a Subway or McDonald's or anything like that near there. You're like, okay, well, this is an area where some of these bigger businesses want to go. And so I have found, and I've heard from a lot of other people who do this, that a lot of these leasing brokers for commercial, they just don't make enough in it to really care that much. And so, like I said, with that one building, it did not get leased for a year. And then I took it over and it got done. And I think it's just returning the phone calls quickly and really caring. And as the owner, if you sign a 5-year lease, often it's worth millions of dollars. As a broker, it's worth, I don't know, 6% or 3%. And it's just not at the top of their priority list. And so, and depending on who it is, right? Like, my broker in Ohio is doing an amazing job and she really cares. But I don't think seeing vacancies is a red flag. That's what I'm looking for. So I always still want value add with a strip mall.
Yeah.
And traffic counts, like for me, my minimums, if I have 16,000 vehicles per day passing in front of it, I think it's a good area.
Okay. Okay, cool. Thank you. That gives me confidence that it is a learnable thing. It's just a slightly different context for some of the same principles. And I too, like I basically never buy like turnkey properties because I want to be I want to be using my entrepreneurship to create value for the building and myself. So okay, so going back to this like idea of your own growth journey. So we started this off by talking about Greg, our mutual mentor, and then you also just mentioned a minute ago Rafiq. Would you speak a little bit to the role that mentors have played in your overall journey these last 5 years, and sort of like how they've helped you become a better version of yourself and continue to grow both as a person but as as a portfolio too?
For sure. So I think a lot of people, their biggest thing that holds them back is being scared of the unknown. And when you have someone in your corner like Greg, like Rafiq, who has done it before and can essentially assure you that you can do it yourself, right? Like they're not doing this for me, but having somebody who has done this before, and if I have questions, can be like, oh, it's just this, or, don't worry about it. Even just a simple, like, you got this, you can do it. Somebody who has experienced it before and who I see as being very confident and who I admire, having them just in the background kind of looking over these deals has made me way more confident than I would have been on my own. So that first deal, for example, in Eau Claire, this was before I had met Greg yet. And so my first strip mall was actually right before my first Power Players. And so I found it about a year before I even brought it to anybody, maybe 6 months, but it was a long time. I was looking at it. I was like, God, this like seems like it'd be a good deal. It's in Eau Claire where I'm from, but I'm scared that I don't know anything about commercial, right? So my brother and I go on a vacation and I show it to my brother and we're both looking at it. It's kind of daunting. And we're like, this seems like it'd be a good, like we could do it, but how do we know? And why hasn't the current owner been able? It was at 50% vacancy. We're like, well, we know the area. It's a good area. What's wrong with this property? It's scary and it's millions of dollars and I can't afford for that not to go right. And so Jake and I got really interested in it. We looked into it a lot. On this particular deal, there was also a land lease in place, which we were also not familiar with. We understood the general concept, but we had to negotiate out of that actually. And we ended up doing that at the closing, a little bit before the closing, but we did a double closing. So anyways, Jake and I then were very interested in this and had spoken with the broker and everything and felt a little more confident. And then I was like, Jake, we should like really bring someone in who really knows what he's doing. So then we brought Rafiq in. So then the three of us did it. And once we had Rafiq there, who is not the hands-on person, but he was a great mentor to be able to be like, you got to do this and you got to do this. Like as simple as like putting my signs in the windows, right? I had a design. He's like, no, simple. Just call, text your number. I'm like, okay, well, I'll do that then. You know what I mean? Like just little things that he's learned over the years that now I also know. But it's nice having somebody who has done it and who can save you from making the stupid mistakes that you'd probably make. And so I'm very, very glad that we did bring Rafiq into that. Because realistically, without somebody like him, we probably would have been too scared to close on it on our own.
Yeah. So a mentor can definitely help, obviously, with illuminating the path in front of you, like don't step on that pothole or definitely do this and things like that.
Yeah.
The other thing I've experienced, I'd love to hear your take on this too, is I feel working with Greg, I feel like one of the things he has done the most for me is he's looked at me, he's understood me, and he's seen the things that have the most potential, and he's
Yes.
pulled them out, and he's made those things the focus. And that, these days I'm starting to refer to this more as like strengths-based real estate entrepreneurship. Like figure out who you are, like what are you magic at, and let's make sure that like everything else is kind of designed around that. So one of the things I guess I wanted to find out from you, because I just think this is fascinating, like paradox a little bit of growing is this process of like expansion, but I also kind of feel like as you grow, in some ways you get narrower and narrower and narrower, because you know who you are more and more and more, and you understand like where you add the value the best, and your focus gets clearer and clearer. And it's just weird to me because those things sound almost like opposites, expanding but also focusing a little bit. So I guess that I just want to hear, like, how do you feel like that process has gone for you? Because like you are probably a much more honed, in some ways specific version of a real estate entrepreneur now than you were 5 years ago, when you were probably kind of more open to everything. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. And so that's actually something that Greg has helped me a lot with as well, right? So, you know, and he talks about this a lot. Like there's certain things that as entrepreneurs like ourselves, we should be doing, and there's certain things that we should be delegating. And in the beginning, you're doing everything, right? And that's good. I think it's really good to have experience in learning how to change a toilet and how to do these things that you expect other people to do, and you expect them to be easy and just get done, but they're difficult things, and sometimes things go wrong. And I think having that background has been great for me. But I'm so glad that now I do feel like I know what my strong suits are. And for me personally, what I really like doing is being the one talking to the tenant and getting them in the unit. I think that's my strength. It's what I enjoy the most. I also really like negotiating, trying to get, really it's talking to people. I really enjoy talking with people, understanding what they want, and making something that works for both of us. And I think that works with both acquiring a property as well as finding a good tenant. Because unlike residential, commercial leasing is more of a negotiation. So what do they want? What do you want? Typically you want them in there longer. They want to start out shorter. You know, a lot of times they want you to do all of the TI and the build out for them. Well, I don't really like overseeing the build out. It can be really stressful and complicated, especially when you're doing a build out to someone else, what someone else wants. So there's a lot of negotiating in there. And I think over the past couple of years, I've gotten good, a lot better, not great, I wouldn't say, but a lot better at doing what I'm best at, just like it sounds like you have. And Greg has been huge in pushing me to not focus on the things that I don't enjoy, because I'm not as good at them anyways.
Yeah. I just think that's such an incredibly important aspect of this, because like we can't do it all anyway. So it's like we all kind of know, all right, I need to delegate the things I'm not good at. But then like the flip side of the same coin is, if we can identify the things that we're magic at and just pull them out and like make everything kind of centered around those, then everything changes, I guess, in a better way.
Yeah.
And so, you know, like on this show, a lot of our focus is about relationship orientation, working directly with sellers and things like that. And you just mentioned, you know, it's kind of like talking to a lot of people. And so one of the questions I was curious is like, how do you feel that your likability, your natural ability to kind of connect with people and talk with them, and how do you feel like that has served you overall in your journey so far?
I mean, I think it's been huge. And really, I do care too. You know, when tenants move in and they're so excited, I am so excited. I mean, it's so fun for me, and I think that's, you know, my mom is the same way. I think it's like we just, if they're you're changing somebody's life, and being able to talk with them, yeah, that's great, but really it's getting them to understand that I also really care. And when talking with sellers, I want them to understand what I'm looking to do, because a lot of times if you like each other, they want you to do well too. And I don't want to be screwing anybody over. And so I think in general, just being able to communicate in an authentic way where people understand that you really do want it to be win-win for everybody, I think that's been really huge. And I have learned from people who are really good at that as well. Both Greg and Rafiq, I think, are really good at doing that, and I've been able to see that like exemplified. But I think naturally I am very empathetic, and I very much do care about I just want people who want to do well and who are working hard to succeed. And so I think it's a great position to be in when you're a landlord, especially for commercial properties.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you brought up that word empathy. I feel like this is maybe the single most important word that could and should be used or focused on a lot more. And I think unfortunately people hear the word empathy and when then like what they're interpreting is, oh, you want me to make this a charity and I'm charging them only $20 a foot when it should be 24 because I'm empathetic. And it's like, no, it's not sympathy. It's not charity. It's just like,
Right.
I can put myself in their shoes and think about it from their angle, which now allows me to communicate better with them. And so I'm shocked, just sort of in general in our industry. I feel like I'm shocked by how many people who are just like, this is a numbers only thing. It's nothing to do with emotions or feelings or anything ever. I'm like, well,
That is not
you're
true.
not a computer. Your seller's
Yeah.
not a freaking computer. Your tenant's not a freaking computer. There are a lot of numbers involved with all this, but like you're never going to get to any numbers if you're not like able to connect with another person. And so I love to hear that you feel like that's been a major part of what you've been doing.
And no matter what, like, life happens for people, right? You have tenants who come in together and one of them dies and the other one's the spouse, and like you have to work through these things, and having that good relationship with them and building that trust there. I don't want my husband's I don't want, for example, I literally just had this, right? Husband and wife came, they have a little store in my first strip mall in Eau Claire. Love both of them. He just passed away. So she just called, and she's worried. And we're like, and as a landlord, you can do a lot to relieve like these extra stresses that they have. Like, don't worry about late fees. Just, take your time, do what you need to. You've been a good tenant. I don't know, like they worry about, oh my God, my payment was late and I didn't realize it was. Don't worry about it. Like, seriously, I think it's and maybe as you get bigger, it's harder to do this, but where I'm at right now, I certainly make the final decision. And when life happens and there's big things that don't really affect me, but affect people greatly, of course, like any normal person, you're going to work with them. And luckily my partners are all on the same page with me. So my brother and Rafiq, they're my two main partners. And yeah, it's definitely relationship based. And I like that a lot.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
And you're working with them for years too. So you really do get to know them. It's not 1 year and they're out of there. Typically they'll stay there for a long time, even if they initially only sign a 1-year lease because it's new business. Usually they're renewing, and I like to go visit, and yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that too, because as you were talking about the couple with one of them who passed away, and then giving them some flexibility, I was thinking about like the difference between like the battle and the war. Like you can concede a couple battles because like you're winning the war overall. Like your overall relationship with them is the bigger picture, not whether they paid their late fees this month.
Yeah.
The overall health of your building is a reflection of like their long-term stability in there, and if they do renew your lease, and so like looking at it from a 60,000 foot level, as well as just the level of like today and this month and things like that. And
For sure. And people talk too. Like, if you're going to be rude and a bad landlord, I mean, I know that there's a lot that you just throw online and people look at it and then, who knows, but in my mind, I think that my tenants do talk, and people who are good landlords and who are slumlords, and even if it's commercial and not residential, I think it still is known, and I always want to be the former, so a good landlord.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So to wrap it up, as you were recapping the beginning of your story, and you're buying some real estate on the side, you're kind of on this path, you're like, oh, maybe these two things can work together, I'll just do a little bit of it in my free time. Like, it's just so relatable. I'm sure gosh, everybody listening to this either can relate to that right now, or like that's something that they went through too. But then also where you are now, and especially in the amount of time that transformation has taken place, is not as relatable for people. Like, that's incredible. And so if there are people listening right now, which I'm sure is pretty much all of them, who are thinking like, oh my gosh, how do I do some of the things that Alexandra has done? How do I harness some of that, or get some of that mojo, or make some of that try to progress and trajectory? Like, what encouragement would you give somebody who's in that, like, I'm trying to get my first couple deals done. They're small. I got lots of other life things going on, other job, family, maybe stuff like that.
Yeah. Don't talk yourself out of it. I think people get there and then they get scared. And I get frustrated with this because people call me and they're like, oh, can I pick your brain, or can we talk? And they're all excited about it and they want to, but you can't make excuses, because if you're going to make excuses, it's just never going to happen. So I think it's just, it's scary, and you're never going to know what you're getting into until you're into it. But nobody that's doing it is even knows before that, things change every time. Nothing has been the same. None of these deals have been the same. None of the problems have really been the same. You are still figuring out as you go. And so I think it's just, stop talking yourself out of it, because that's what people do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. It's funny. So being on the interviewer side, I'm like, we're going to take some little clip from this interview, and it's going to be the thing that plays at the very beginning of the episode. That's like the teaser that sort of captures the spirit of it. And that, what you just said is totally that. Don't talk yourself out of it. I love that. And I think some of the things you just alluded to, one of the silly things I geek out on is thinking about the difference between an investor and an entrepreneur. And I tend to think entrepreneurs are the more of the ones who do what you just described, which is like, I know I'm going to encounter all sorts of stuff I've never faced before, but we're going to figure it out. We're going to make the most of it. We're going to create value in these ways. And so I love that so much.
Well, thank you. Yeah. I mean, I get it. It's scary it was scary for me. It was scary for you. It's scary for everybody, but if you want to do it, everyone's able to do it. So yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to share, your story with us, and to even act as a consultant to me on helping me get more comfortable with commercial. But it's so exciting what you have done, and I feel so challenged in all the right ways and inspired by it. So thank you so much for being that for us.
Thank you. And yeah, I mean, I really appreciate being here. I've listened to this before, and so has Mike, and we're really excited to speak on this. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well,